The Church of Scientology is a religious organization founded in the United States that has been around since the early 1950s. L. Ron Hubbard, its founder and supposedly the sole source of its teachings, wrote Dianetics, the Modern Science of Mental Health in 1950 in an effort to reform psychiatry. But his methods and teachings were rightfully rejected by the medical community because they could not hold up to scientific rigor. Hubbard then transformed his counseling system into a religious philosophy called Scientology and grew the organization into what became a worldwide movement by the 1960s. There are many who believe, I among them, that Hubbard started Dianetics and then Scientology as con jobs to swindle people out of their money. However, I also believe that Hubbard suffered from his own personal demons and was also trying to use his own techniques to cure himself. That he never succeeded is both a tragedy and a kind of karmic justice, given how many people Hubbard lied to, cheated, and worse. Scientology is best known for its celebrity members and for its harsh treatment of critics and former members, even hiring lawyers and private investigators to stalk, harass, and intimidate them, as well as having a history of covert operations and even infiltrating the United States government, a caper that landed Hubbard's wife and 11 other Scientologists in jail in the early 1980s. All of these covert operations and underhanded dealings were carried out at Hubbard's behest. And to this day, the organization still operates strictly according to the policies and guidelines that Hubbard wrote. Now, he died in 1986, and a young, hardcore Scientologist named David Miscavige took control. Over the years, he's put himself in charge of every single aspect of Scientology's operations and runs the organization as sole dictator. No one can question Miscavige's orders, and according to the testimony of many of his former aides and subordinates, Miscavige does not hesitate to use physical violence to keep his people in line. Always at the center of controversy, Scientology has a long and sad history, but its core membership is still working hard to try to resuscitate Scientology's toxic image and make it known and well thought of in the world at large. Scientologists position Scientology as mankind's only hope for world peace, a means to bring about an end to criminality and illiteracy, and to bring their unique form of spiritual enlightenment to everyone. However, there are still a few problems. Let's talk about the hypocrisy of the Church of Scientology. On the one hand, the creed of the Church says that all men are created with equal rights and have inalienable rights to their own lives and to think freely, talk freely, to write freely their own opinions, and to counter or utter or write upon the opinions of others. Yet if a Scientologist gets out of line by communicating something negative about Scientology, even in private, they can find themselves the target of directed harassment campaigns and have their lives ruined practically overnight. On the one hand, Scientology claims communication is the universal solvent, and with it alone you can solve any problem with interpersonal relations. Yet, if you have a problem with the Church, you're told you can only communicate about it with 1 or 2 special Church staff members, who never return your calls, by the way, and that if you do not shut up about your negative views, you will be labeled a suppressive person and forcefully disconnected from every person you know and love who happens to be a Scientologist. They will not be allowed to communicate with you in any way, not even a birthday card or text message at Christmas. That's hardly solving problems with communication. And, on the one hand, Scientology claims to be the world's leading authority on mental healing and mental health.
We are the authorities on getting people off drugs. We are the authorities on the mind. We are the authorities on improving conditions. Criminon, we can rehabilitate criminals. Way to happiness, we can bring peace and unite cultures.
Yet their track record in this area is dismal, littered with broken families and shattered lives. Some people practicing Scientology have even died for their efforts, believing that L. Ron Hubbard had the answers to cure them, when in fact he only made their condition that much more unbearable and their lives that much less worth living. Just look at the case of Lisa McPherson, who famously died while in the supposed care of hardcore Scientology believers. For days, they wouldn't even consider taking her to a hospital until it was too late, her physical symptoms having gotten so bad that it became obvious, even to the Scientologists, that things were way out of hand. Lisa McPherson trusted these Scientologists with her very life, and she died as a result. That is what happens when people believe what Scientologists say. Why would a pseudoscientific brand of spiritual belief like Scientology even want to get near the complicated and potentially dangerous field of mental health? Because L. Ron Hubbard delusionally believed he had found the answer to all mental and spiritual problems. And he insisted that Scientologists do everything in their power to spread his gospel as far and wide as possible. Hubbard dreamed of slamming his name into history and thought he should be enshrined above all others. He was, after all, a narcissist and a fraud. By 1969, having grown Scientology to a worldwide organization with tens, if not hundreds of thousands of followers, Hubbard had completely fallen for his own con. He then made it church policy to engage in a massive PR effort to take over the field of mental health once and for all. Of course, eradicating psychology and psychiatry would be necessary to make that happen. Let's take a look at the policy Hubbard wrote on this and what Scientology is doing these days to follow it. HCO Policy Letter of February 3, 1969. Public Image. For a long while, we have not had an exactly stated policy on building a public image. We have just been ourselves and done our jobs and hoped somebody would catch on. This is basically what protected us, and we should keep doing it. But the time has come to also build a public image as an outflow publicity action. The image is: Scientologists are the people who are cleaning up the field of mental healing and effectively handling mental health on the planet. This is the kind of hypocrisy I'm talking about. I'm not sure what you thought hearing that, but when I first read it, I just about fell out of my chair. And I used to be a Scientologist. Of all the things Scientology's not doing, effectively handling mental health on the planet would be at the top of the list. If you haven't seen, on my channel I have done many videos and interviews documenting firsthand and in detail Hubbard's very amateurish and completely destructive methods for handling psychosis and other mental health issues. Locking people up until they play nice and tell you what you want to hear is not conducive to good therapeutic results. But in a nutshell, that is what Hubbard advises be done. Predictably, there have been tragic results. Hubbard talked to his followers as though dealing with mental health was a completely settled issue. He targeted everyone else as being the bad guys. Here's what he said. We will handle the first part of it first, cleaning up the field of mental healing. It is a dirty, inhuman, rotten field, full of graft, misappropriation, phony authoritarianism, and betrayal. Narcissists and authoritarians have an interesting habit of accusing their enemies of the very things they're doing. Whether this springs from the delusional ravings of an out-of-touch cult leader or is the carefully crafted product of a calculating mind doesn't really matter, because the results are the same. Scientologists are put in the position of having to defend this nonsense and treat it as though it really works, even though they know deep down that it does nothing like what Hubbard claimed. However, because Scientology is an authoritarian cult that dictates what one is allowed to think and do, Scientologists have adopted many techniques to quiet that dissonance and follow Hubbard's directions, no matter how irrational they may sound. That's the thing about the human mind. It can rationalize almost anything it needs to if it feels it's in the right. And if there is one thing Scientologists are absolutely certain of, it's that they're right and the rest of the world is absolutely wrong. Hubbard constantly reinforces this messaging throughout Scientology's materials, as he does in the very next lines. We are the only ones in it who have clean hands and effective technology. So we have no choice but to noisily clean it up. That builds that much of the image. By uniting with other civic, humanitarian, and civil and human rights groups, we can make an organized progress. For the second part, we're already doing it to a degree. Effectively handling mental healing on the planet is what we are being effective in doing. But we don't make enough public image with it. We keep building the image to Scientologists. We must study how to do it outside. We have clean hands. We are effective. We dedicatedly do our jobs well. We must keep on doing this. But we have to find more public ways to say so. Now, let's make something clear. It's not that psychology or psychiatry are above reproach or have never done anything wrong. Quite the opposite, in fact. Psychiatry has acted in sometimes brutal and even murderous ways to contain and control psychotics and other insane people. The stories out of Bedlam were and are a horror story that no rational person would ever want to see in the here and now. And unfortunately, there are still places that operate as though they were in the Dark Ages, especially in third world countries where oversight is all but non-existent. But that's not the case in almost all first world countries, where systems have gone into place over the last few decades that help ensure mentally ill patients have clean, safe quarters, decent food, and get proper medication and medical care. This system is far from perfect and makes mistakes all the time. So I'm not about to assert that everything is fine and dandy, but let's be real. Our evolution of knowledge across all the sciences over the past 100 years has been unparalleled by any time in history. Psychiatry and psychology didn't even exist as subjects before 1879. So for a field that's been around for less than 150 years, it's made some impressive strides forward. To say that psychiatry is still a barbaric, murderous practice that should be eradicated from the face of the planet is not just hyperbole, but completely wrong-headed. Hubbard died 32 years ago. The progress made in the humanities in that time has been enormous, and yet Scientologists are treated to regular re-messaging of Hubbard's out-of-date dogma, which tells them that psychiatry is nothing short of concentrated evil, and there's nothing else to be done but to destroy it utterly and replace it with Scientology. Seeing how Scientologists have treated the insane in their care, this is not simply a bad idea, but would firmly put mental health care right back in the Dark Ages it crawled out of. I don't think anyone needs or wants that. People who follow Scientology closely have noticed that over and over again, the Church's Office of Special Affairs works very hard to create connections and allies amongst different civic, religious, and humanitarian groups. This is all being done according to this policy. The reasons for this are that Scientology lacks the resources to truly take on any major societal or cultural issue by itself, and so they use the principle that my enemy's enemy is my friend to form bonds with groups who are doing something effective to combat social and societal ills. People might not like Scientology, but if their crusade is to reform psychiatry or promote human rights or get kids off drugs, they find a willing and relatively well-funded ally in the Church of Scientology. Also, Scientology's toxic reputation does not always precede it. Experience shows that people who ally with the Church of Scientology are generally awful at doing their due diligence and fact-checking the claims that Scientology makes to them. Typically, they meet a well-groomed, smiling Sea Org member from the Office of Special Affairs, A person who has spent tens, if not hundreds of hours practicing how to smile, how to shake hands, how to talk to non-Scientologists in a relatable way, how to lie without being detected, and how to not answer questions they don't want to while seeming to do so. OSA staff members are not amateurs. The reason these people fall for Scientology's tactics is not that they're stupid, but because they don't suspect that anyone would do the things that Scientology does. They can't imagine that anyone would not only lie to their face repeatedly, but that they would do it so smoothly and sincerely that you actually want to believe them. That is what OSA staff are trained to do, and they're very good at it. Going back to the policy letter, the public relations work they do is twofold. It would also be a good policy to have 2 PROs. One specializes in plans to clean up the field of mental healing and grabs allied organization support, holds committee meetings, works on crusades about it, gets close to top publishers, and really spearheads the word or area about the abuses to human rights in the field. The other PRO works to bannerhead the successes and the programs to effectively handle mental healing on the planet. He also gets support from allied organizations, different than human rights attacks, like churches, and gets a crusade going for handling all the mental healing problems, not just using Scientology. In both instances, you have to go civic, go outside Scientology, get support, organize committees, plot out campaigns, work for outside finance, etc. In handling the above public image policy, you don't announce the policy. You use it for a guide to keep pounding variations of the same message. The policy is expressed in community action, well press covered, not just in statements. Committee meetings, deputations, picketing, big names, events. You figure out the story that will be written, then do it, seeing it gets covered by having the press to hand. Making all issues hot, exciting, brutal, or sensational. Go strictly circus in the type of message. You can and must ally with real humanitarian and civil rights groups, getting press coverage for every such contact. So, how does the Church of Scientology apply this? Well, let's take a look at one recent example, which was not a direct assault on psychiatry, but was an effort on the part of the Office of Special Affairs to smear a prominent church critic, Mike Rinder. They shamelessly use his own estranged daughter, Taryn Touche, who not only refuses to talk to her own father, but actually tries to rally the press, human rights groups, and politicians against him. These photo ops and work she's doing has been going on for well over a year now, a sustained campaign of targeted harassment and lies. Mike Rinder never beat on his wife or daughter, but that's the story they're going with in an effort to ride on the coattails of the Me Too movement and to ally with victim support groups. Just like Hubbard said, she's not trying to gain support by promoting Scientology, but instead is morphing her message to fit with other causes. Taryn is tasked with telling her made-up nonsense to anyone who will listen. Get as many photos as possible and publicize that work on the blog and social media accounts the church created for her. The really sick part about this whole campaign is the way a daughter has been turned by the church's lies against her own father. She thinks because he's critical of the church that he must be guilty of criminal activity. This is what L. Ron Hubbard wrote, and Taryn was raised to never question Hubbard or what he says. So when the church tells her to badmouth her dad to the media and gives her an exact script to do so, she blindly goes along with it. She really believes that by telling vicious lies about her father to the public at large, and she knows she's lying, by the way, that she's making the world a better place. Why? Because Hubbard said so right at the end of the policy letter. Our end product is a sane planet. His was a dead one. This public image can and must be built if this planet is to survive at all. This sort of thing is not just confined to PR campaigns like Taryn's. Joy Villa is another Scientologist who over the last few years has been maneuvering to get into politics and has been featured in media for her outrageous outfits and her avid support for Donald Trump. Never having met a photo op she didn't like, Joy has shamelessly thrown herself in front of anyone who can help her political aspirations, but ultimately Scientology managed to screw that up, as described in detail on Tony Ortega's blog, The Underground Bunker. I've put a link to that story in the description section of this video. As far as this policy letter goes, if Scientologists think cleaning up mental healing is so important, they can start with themselves. If they think they are truly saving the world, perhaps they should start by figuring out what they're saving it from. When any organization has to resort to dishonesty, stalking, harassment, and other criminal acts as the only means of responding to their critics, perhaps they are the ones we need saving from. Let's face it, the founder of Scientology didn't just die alone and in hiding from the law for 5 straight years. He also went completely insane. This was well documented by one of Hubbard's most loyal followers, Steve Sarge Fouth, who was with him until the very end. Hubbard actually asked Sarge to build him an electronic shock machine that would kill Hubbard's body if used. And Sarge only reluctantly agreed, but didn't follow Hubbard's instructions because he didn't want to kill him. That was Hubbard's mental state in the end, frightened of shadows and hiding from everyone and everything. As my good friend Dr. Jeff Wassel noted, if Scientology couldn't handle the mental health of its own founder, why would anyone turn to Scientology to cure or treat them? Stay as far away from Scientology as possible. As you've seen here, they cannot be trusted to ever tell you the truth about anything. Thank you for watching.